So welcome to this session of the Kearney Sustainability in Action Hub. This session today will talk on the topic of digital assets to tackle Scope 3 emissions. I'm your host, Imran Dasu. I'm a partner at Kearney. I lead our strategic operations practice in Northern Europe, and I'm global lead for our sustainable and responsible sourcing work. Today, I'm joined by esteemed panelists. We have three of them. We have Vijay Kasi, who's a fellow partner colleague at Kearney. We have Ty Coleman, co-founder of Optera and lead for Scope 3 efforts there now. And we have Yapen Hollist, who's at SAP and lead for their sustainability control tower. The topic of Scope 3, most companies now track and report and their progress in Scope 1, which is their emissions caused by the company's own operations. And many also touch on Scope 2, the indirect emissions from purchased energy, so electricity, heating, cooling, and so on. But Scope 3, although it often represents more than 80-90% of the total emissions footprint, is really more difficult to address. And it's, of course, primarily because it's outside of the company's immediate span of control. So Scope 3 tends to be more difficult, but for many businesses, many industries, it is indeed a major source of emissions, and organizations with net zero commitments, regardless of timeline, if Scope 3 isn't addressed and addressed quickly, then they don't meet net zero commitments, period. Now, given the inherent challenge, we're seeing an increase in the use of digital assets to address Scope 3, to measure, to reduce, to disclose. And these tools would, of course, have to be integrated into what we already see as very rapidly changing digital procurement landscapes within our client organizations. So we're going to explore this today with our panelists, and I'm going to ask each to quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some exciting Q&A with them. Vijay.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be part of this panel. I'm a partner based out of Mumbai. I am leading what we call as Kearney Procurement System and Kearney Operating System, where sustainability is one of the key area that we are pushing for.
Thank you. And thanks, Kearney, for hosting. Very excited to be here as well. As Chief Revenue Officer of Optera, we're a firm that specializes in software and services that help companies account for, manage, and decarbonize their emissions inventory with a specialty on Scope 3 and 20 years of experience developing work in this space for companies really across the globe.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm Japen Hollist. I lead SAP's go-to-market activities for our sustainability solutions in North America. Excited to be on the panel.
I mentioned in my intro a little bit around the challenges, and maybe that's where we'll start. Maybe with you, Vijay. Why do you think Scope 3 emissions are so difficult to measure?
This is a loaded question, I must say. The multiple dimensions to it. Let me just maybe take a couple and invite fellow panelists to add on. To begin with, Scope 3 is not one type of emission, right? Unlike, I would almost argue, Scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 has 15 categories of emission. When you actually look at all of these 15, it extends from, right, products and services to employee travel to entire downstream manufacturing process. None of the companies today are organized this way, that any particular function actually oversees, has control over all of these 15 categories. To begin with, for starters, to address Scope 3, you need an end-to-end mindset, right from the cradle, like the cradle to grave, for every product line, every material that goes into the product, the manufacturing process and processes that happens at each step of the conversion to the time it enters the grave, right? To whether it's incinerated, landfilled, and hopefully reintroduced into our entire system. So no function within the company is organized this way to be able to tackle this. And hence, I would say this is one of the most difficult areas to address.
Thanks, Vijay. Chapin, what are your thoughts on this? Scope 3 difficult?
Yeah, it's hard, and the main reason is that these emissions aren't inside your company, so you don't have any systems to track them, right? That's the bottom line, right? We remember that scope 1 is known as direct emissions because they are within the four walls of your company, but scope 2 and scope 3 are known as indirect, meaning they're outside your controls. And from having spent some time in procurement, one of the things that I realized early on is that I never had the best data on anything that was done by a supplier. The supplier always had the best data. And so I think that's the case here with scope 3, is that you've got to now collaborate to get that data from your suppliers if it's going to be accurate.
Thank you all for that. Tai, do you agree with Vijay and Japen? Do you have a different perspective?
Certainly think there are challenges here, but I have maybe a slightly controversial take in that for the clients we've engaged with, they come to us with some amount of anxiety or apprehension about the challenges they perceive in scope 3. But what we found time and time again is that taken pragmatically, using industry best practices and expert advising, calculating scope 3 maybe not be all that difficult. I sometimes use the analogy of a runner who's comfortable with like a 5 or a 10K race, but wants to jump into the marathon. It's a daunting sort of thought to think about how much longer that race is going to be and to anticipate the pain of such an event. But with good training, proper planning, and a solid game plan, many folks will tell you that the marathon is actually not that much different than some of the other sort of local races they'll run. And I like to think that scope 3 is similar. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy and doesn't take some time and resources, but more often than not, we're hearing that, wow, with the right partners in place, this was actually a pretty tractable problem. We can get our hands on it and begin our journey in a meaningful way to be able to start making progress against it.
Oh, fantastic. I like the pragmatism, but also the optimism there in your different responses. So thank you for those. And just let's deep dive into what organizations can do. How they can actually get started, and if they've already started, how they can accelerate. And maybe we start with you, Vijay. I know you've put your mind and your entire team, your Kearney Procurement Systems team, behind this problem, this kind of pretty important problem. And specifically around the tools you've now developed around things like Carbon Cube and other methods. How do they help? How are they helping your clients to measure and start to decarbonize on scope 3?
Let me just share the journey that we've been through, right? As we've been working, right? Like I've been working on procurement for more than a decade and a half, and we've in all of the scope 3 categories, products and services happens to be one of the largest, right? For majority of the companies. And we always have had what we build, what we know, what we build with our clients, right, in procurement space called spend cubes. And this has been something that we've done for such a long time that gives very quickly, by looking at your purchase systems and accounts payable systems, what's the spend a particular company has with their suppliers, and you can slice and dice it by business and product line, by supplier or geography. We said, this is something companies understand. This is how, right, you should actually go about measuring your scope 3. And we immediately came up with this concept, right, called Carbon Cube, where you take your existing data and thinking around spend cube and just spin it, instead of spend, have a carbon footprint. And this is an idea that clicked with our clients. And then to Tai's point, right, it's kind of having a guide around navigating this space, where we started out. Once you know what you are measuring, again at the highest level possible, then we extended to build in the methodology and framework to cut across all of the categories of scope 3, to be able to know what is your current measurement, and then using this framework and methodology to identify the hotspots, so that you can start building a plan towards decarbonization or net zero. So this is what a carbon cube is. It's basically a set of methodologies and framework to help measure scope 3 emissions and look at key hotspots and identify strategies to help decarbonize.
Thank you, Vijay. So it's all about the hotspots and getting started. Ty, maybe turn to you. You know, how is Optera helping companies on this decarbonization journey?
Yeah, I'll build off a lot of what Vijay was saying there, but you first need to know the sources of these emissions. If you've developed an inventory with spend-based estimates or LCA factors, you may know the biggest, categories in terms of the biggest impacts for focus, but you won't know the specific suppliers that are contributing to your emissions or the ones that may have the biggest benefit. So our tools help companies develop these inventories at a supplier-specific level so that the actions they take can have a direct impact on the emissions they're accounting for in their supply chain. So just like Japan said, it's important to acknowledge that the supplier's scope 1 and 2 is your scope 3. So as suppliers develop and improve their own emissions, you as the buying company will see the benefit in your annual emissions inventory as well. For example, we have a large tech company that with a $20 billion supply chain spend, and we've been able to get supplier-specific data for more than 90% of their spend. Now, this has helped show us, and again, connecting to Vijay's comment here, that about 30% of the suppliers already are well down the emissions management maturity curve. So not much additional work is necessarily needed by the client to ensure that these suppliers manage and disclose their emissions, set aggressive targets, and take meaningful action to reduce their emissions. But there's about 50% of the suppliers that need some sort of movement on the maturity curve to help ensure that they will achieve, or that the client achieves their decarbonization goal. And it's not a homogeneous solution. Some suppliers need to improve data quality, others need to set aggressive emissions targets, and still others need to ensure that they're making investments to stay on track with their decarbonization goal. And so this client, in collaboration with some other industry peers and groups, is working to engage these suppliers where they're at, right? Got to meet them where they're at so that they can move then rapidly across this maturity curve and actually achieve the level of decarbonization that's going to be needed within their supply chain and with the global supply chain as well. Last thing I'll add is this is a long-term problem, but that exercise that I just outlined is not months and months and months of work. We can actually do this by bringing to bear some data sets that are available and some of the tools that we bring to the market to do this in a matter of weeks. I mean, the example I just mentioned was about an 8-week project to get to that point and understanding in their supply chain to be able to take those actions.
Okay, that's helpful, Ty. Let's stay with that theme, because as you say, measuring the emissions is just the first step, and it's not the be all and end all. So once organizations have measured the scope 3 and you have a baseline, and of course the data gets better over time, but what should they then put their minds to? What should they do next?
I think of 3 different steps: prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. A little tongue in cheek, of course, there, but there's so much data that comes together for scope 3, it's virtually impossible to look at the whole inventory and start moving against all of it, right? Where we've seen the best success is when companies can prioritize their efforts. As a friend of mine puts it, work on the biggest bars first, right? And for most organizations, these biggest bars, like we've talked about a little bit already, are category 1, purchase goods and services, and category 11, use of sold products. Getting to the most impactful categories is critical to the success of any scope 3 accounting, target setting, or even target achievement. And within these categories, you further prioritize the suppliers, commodities, customers, products, etc., whatever's in there, whatever the unit of measure is, that have the largest impact and the greatest opportunity for reduction. This is where the actionability of the data that you've used to develop the inventory really comes to play. We ensure that our clients are going to get the level of fidelity within these categories that will really enable them to understand how their efforts will produce the level of decarbonization required to achieve their scope 3 target, right? If you think about that end and the levers you're going to pull, set your data up so that you have those levers available to you throughout that journey.
Thank you, Ty. Just maybe switching tack a little bit. You know, from time to time, I will look at the regulatory environment, and I'll just have noticed there's been an exponential increase in the frequency of regulatory requirements across geography, almost pretty much in all regions, and the frequency, but also the depth of requirements is just kind of mind-boggling. And really must sharpen sharpen minds and create this extra imperative. So maybe Japan, I'll turn to you on the topic of regulatory environment. How would you kind of summarize? How would you summarize this? How would you summarize the importance for companies to really keep an accurate record of their emissions?
Thanks, Imran. I reflect in answering this question on a comment made by a KPMG partner who said, Japan, look, we're seeing the SOXification of ESG, right? And if you spend any time like I did dealing with the Sarbanes-Oxley law, things got very, very different. Process controls got far more stringent. As we shift from kind of in North America, at least, a mindset where a sustainability report was a beautiful PR piece, largely run by corporate communications, to now regulation now requiring that key components of that report now be placed in a 10K, right? And now being governed by rules of accounting, right? If the disciplines of corporate communications and accounting are very, very different, right? The level of rigor is very different. And so as a result, I think that migration is what we're seeing. So that helps me to think about, yeah, there's tons of regulation, but the way that we're thinking about it is far, far more rigorous as we move to the future, right? This SOXification of ESG concept. It's really important to track progress, right? So of course we want to account. There's two great words in sustainability. One is accountability, the other is transparency. So that's what stakeholders and shareholders want. They want to hold companies accountable. They want them to be transparent. So being able to show progress over time is why you've got to keep good records and track not just to regulatory standards, but to show that you're on your journey and you're making progress, because your shareholders and your stakeholders are demanding it. Everybody from your employees to your customers to your shareholders are all saying, hey, show me that you're doing something here. And so I think that's important. The other thing is if you fail to do it, you could lose your social license to operate, right? Meaning customers walk away from you because you're not sharing your progress. And I think that's very real depending upon the market that you're in. The market, sustainability is a megatrend and it is moving markets, no doubt. Whether you believe in climate change or don't, markets are changing. And so you have to be responsive to that. And I believe in a real positive note, I believe for companies that embrace it, it becomes a competitive advantage. It clearly becomes a brand differentiator. And I think that we're seeing that in pockets of industry, at least in our client base. It certainly is viewed as a competitive advantage. Hopefully that's helpful.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And I agree with you. I think beyond compliance, this is not just ticking boxes. This is for commercial advantage. But I think the seriousness of the regulatory requirements also, there was a wake-up call, wasn't it, just within the last couple of years at Deutsche Bank, when one of the divisions was raided by federal agents, right, because of potential issues with reporting. So exactly, greenwashing. So this really does focus minds, focus attention. So then what are the kinds of solutions you can bring to bear to help organizations, really get sharp around tracking and reporting?
So it's a great question. So we're really interested in helping companies record and then report so that they can act. And so our solutions are designed to be able to free up team, sustainability teams' time so that they can record and report in a far more automated fashion so that there's more time to act. When I talk to sustainability teams, they'll tell me that they spend 70 to 80% of their time just gathering the data, right? Because it's nowhere in one system that they can naturally integrate and pull up on a regular basis. And they certainly don't have it at period close intervals like you have in finance. They don't have it quarterly. They don't have it monthly, quarterly, or annually. They don't have it that way unless they gather it all and then they have it at the end of the year. And by then, a lot of it is outdated. It's hard to act, right? So I think our solutions are one to be able to automate that data collection and pull it up so that they can track to ambitions and goals so that they can take action. And that's done in our holistic steering and reporting tool called Sustainability Control Tower. But then for Scope 3, which has been our topic here, that's kind of a sub-ledger that we've got a tool called Product Footprint Management that can track detailed actual product Scope 3 data based upon a product bond that's found in an ERP, right, which is SAP. And so we're helping our clients that have already invested in us with their product bombs to be able to use that and get far more accurate Scope 3 data based upon the component parts that make up their products. And then in better collaboration with their supply base, as Ty said, right? You gotta, my Scope 3 is someone else's Scope 1 and 2, and I gotta go find out about it. So that's kind of the two-part solution for Scope 3 that we're addressing.
I think I mean, Japan, just in your answer there, you also alluded to how Scope 3 is one component, a very significant component, but it needs to integrate with kind of other aspects, whether it's product or supply level or whatever. But just maybe staying with you just on that topic.
Yeah.
What else are you seeing? You know, the Scope 3, clearly there are assets, and you've talked, you know, very clearly about those. Tyres talked very clear. What other assets are you seeing in terms of digitization of sustainability? You know, how do you make this work in a much more integrated way, much more holistic way? What are you seeing in this space?
We view it kind of with the control tower at the top as a general ledger to be able to pull up all of your data and track it at those period close intervals. But then underneath it, you've got these sub ledgers that are going to track all kinds of other types of data that you need for your sustainability reporting across the end to end of E, S, and G, right? Environment, social, and governance. So it's, while we've talked about Scope 3, you still got to go get the Scope 1 and the Scope 2 data. And for some large corporations, particularly in oil and gas, that's brutal to go get that information, right? And to get it in an automated fashion where you can pull it up at regular intervals like we talked about. So that it aligns naturally with your financial period close. The other areas are areas like circularity, right? We've got all kinds of regulation now in the UK and Spain and popping up elsewhere on plastic tax. What about EPR, extended producer responsibility schemes that are out there? Those are all areas that governments are requiring corporations to know what you know, the packaging components of their products, and if they're not at a certain government mandate, they will be taxed. And so, and then of course, what about diversity, equity, and inclusion goals? And you've got to have a way to pull that data in as well, so that from end to end, you have a comprehensive data set that where you can track in all the areas that are pertinent to your business. That is this new area of sustainability.
Okay, brilliant. That's helpful. Thank you, Japan. Ty, anything else to add to that, looking more broadly beyond Scope 3 on digitization?
Japan, I think, hit the nail on the head. Like, collection of that data is one of the biggest challenges, but also one of the places I think we're seeing that we're really excited about. So really interesting progress at the industry and sort of corporate collaborative level, where companies are coming together with their peers in alignment with industry best practices to collect data across shared partners. So this is a trend that I think can really be transformative for industries really across the globe, regardless of whether you're IT, automotive, finance, you name it. For example, think about the data that would be most useful to companies and suppliers alike to help develop these inventories, support the action plans, and actually catalyze this collaboration. I highlight CDP is one entity that has done some of that sort of initial and really great work around the supply chain program. And we're seeing enhanced efforts within other industry groups like the Semiconductor Collaboration and Responsible Business Alliance, or RBA. In fact, we're partnering with RBA to administer an emissions management tool that will streamline the surveying of this data across the entire IT ecosystem, improve data quality, improve access to data, improve management on a whole host of critical ESG issues, like we've been talking about here today: climate, water, materials, biodiversity, just to name a few. That shared or coordinated effort really has the potential to accelerate how companies account for and take the actions that are required to address climate change really en masse and as quickly as we need to. I would have advocated that we needed to do this 10, 15 years ago. We're finally at the point now and really starting to make some, I think, nice progress against it. That's what keeps me going every day.
Thank you, Tan. That's a really interesting addition, because it's within the organizations, it's with the suppliers, but it's also with potential kind of industry coalitions, right? Working even with competitors potentially. So that's interesting. Well, let me sort of draw us to a close. I mean, you've all shared wonderful insights, which I'm sure the audience will learn from and get a lot from. But if I could ask you to just kind of boil it down, just reduce it right down to one nugget, what do you want to share with the audience that will really help them succeed on Scope 3? What's your one nugget, your one takeaway? Japan, maybe I'll start with you.
Get your sustainability house in order. And the one nugget is to remember that sustainability is data centric. For corporations, it's data centric. And I think you got to have the data, and that data's got to follow what I call the 4 A's. It's got to be automated, right? So you can record and report, so you can act. You got to have it come at those period close intervals. It's got to be automated. The second A is it's got to be assured. You need data linearity, right? You need to know where this data came from. It just can't come, and not be able to have, data integrity. And the third A is you need it for auditability. Shareholders and stakeholders in your corporation are going to want to know that you can track and trace it all the way back, and that that it's accurate. And the last one, you need that. Public companies need it because their CFO is going to be required to attest to it, right? Just like they do the financials. And if it's criminally inaccurate, well, bad things happen. And so it needs to be very accurate. And I think you got to get that data. You got to understand that you're gathering data, and you need to get it along the 4 A's. And you start with Scope 1 and Scope 2, right? That's where you start. You got to make sure that that's accurate. Then move to Scope 3, but make sure that you've got good Scope 1 and Scope 2 data. That'll make the journey easier.
Japan, thank you. And let me turn to Ty for your closing thoughts, your nugget, Ty, for the audience.
Japan just really boiled it in a really nice way. I really love that framing. I would just add that develop your data so that the actions you take will have a direct impact on your emissions inventory and will be congruent with your business objectives. So how you think about those fundamental nuggets that are coming together and the types of levers you're going to pull and the way that you anticipate seeing your emissions reduce over time, think about those ends to develop that data at the onset.
Thank you. Vijay, what about you?
I have just 2 things to share. One, bring in your end-to-end product mindset. That means think cradle to grave. This is how you can look across all categories of Scope 3 to know where your products are coming from, what are specifications it is made of, who are your suppliers, so you work with the right ones. What's the value chain? Where are these products manufactured or assembled, or there are sub-assemblies that are sourced from? How is it being converted in your own operation? Who are your immediate customers if you are in B2B space? What happens to this product right after it ships out of your gate to the time, right? Depending on the material choice, what happens to the end of life, right? Is it recycled? Is it incinerated? Or is it landfill? Bring in this end-to-end thinking. Address every bit that's possible to ensure you are completely looking end-to-end to frame up a list of initiatives that you can embark on and build a roadmap against it to ensure you achieve your decarbonization reduction strategies or net zero strategies.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Vijay, and thank you to my panel today. We covered a lot of ground in terms of Scope 3, setting priorities and determining hotspots, as you call them, Vijay. That was very clear. But getting started and improving data over time. We took a product lens, but also we talked about digitization beyond Scope 3, right? The integration of different topics, of diverse supply chains and biodiversity, and really to think about it, and also more broadly, an area I hadn't thought about, working with competitors and making collaborations there as well. But broad-ranging discussion, really value your thoughts, and thank you again, Vijay, thank you, Ty, thank you, JPEN, for those contributions, and we'll close our session out at that point. Thank you.